You guys ready? Okay. Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation for this pedestrian railroad crossing project alternatives analysis open public meeting this evening. My name is Wayne Aldrich. I'm the Public Works Director for the town of Normal. And with us are representatives of WSP Parsons Brinkerhoff. So they are the study team lead consultant for our Phase 1 engineering for this crossing project. I'd like to introduce Stephanie Brown, Tim Sullivan, and Carrie Desmond with WSP Parsons Brinkerhoff. So we're going to start out with a presentation here, kind of review some stuff first, and then most of the slides are the same things you saw in the hallway if you've been here for a while, with a little bit of additional explanation, and then ultimately we'll get into a public comment period, but we'll start with this presentation first, and then we'll go from there. So I want to start out with this slide. This is a slide of the Uptown 2.0 master plan. So this was approved by the council in 2015. So we looked at what's next in the Uptown area, and part of that was look at the area south of the tracks. So if I can point this here. So we're right here. So this is the tracks here, and this is the area south of the tracks. About 8 acres of potential redevelopment area there. The town actually has authority or owns most of that property on that side of the tracks. So very much potential for redevelopment in that area. Could you switch back, Stephanie, please? Thanks. So one to kind of, the other thing to point out, here's the building we're in, the Uptown Station. We have a platform on the north side, and then just constructed, if you look out the window, you'll see the new platform recently built on the south side, so a new passenger rail platform, as well as the old Amtrak station is still there, and it's been actually rehabilitated to potentially serve as a south boarding lobby. So it's projected that in the near future, Amtrak trains can meet at the same time in Normal and load and unload passengers here in Normal. So I just wanted to go over that because that's important to this project. So this is kind of our problem statement. What's the issues that we see out there? Well, the number of trains has increased dramatically, and you probably noticed that if you see. There's a lot more of these what I call intermodal trains, so the container car trains coming through Normal anymore. So really a lot more rail activity than we saw 5 years ago. And it takes about three and a half minutes for these trains to clear some of our street crossings like Linden or Broadway. And there has been increased pedestrian and bicycle activity in the Uptown area. So again, there's a lot more of that type of traffic in the Uptown area, and they need to get across the tracks as well. Amtrak passengers. So if there is a need for Amtrak passengers to go from this side of the tracks to the other side of the tracks, they're really, right now their option is to go down to Linden or Broadway. And there are provisions for that, but there would be a more preferred and a better crossing, and we'll talk about some of those alternatives. And typically tracks are perceived barriers in central business districts or when they go through towns like this because of the amount of train traffic and the difficulty and safety issues crossing tracks. And then generally what was discussed in the Uptown 2.0 is just a better way to cross into this new Uptown South redevelopment area. So the purpose of our meeting this evening is to review the alternatives that have been approved by the town council for this proposed pedestrian crossing, review the screening criteria that have been set by the town council at a meeting in February, and then review the screening results that the team led by WSP Parsons Brinkerhoff has come up with, and then really ultimately is to receive your comments and questions. So this slide just talks to the project schedule, really. It shows another location map, the Uptown North, and this is the area of Uptown we're most familiar with, but Also, this 8-acre area to the south that's proposed for redevelopment. Again, Broadway Street over here, Linden Street over here, and then this proposed crossing, most of the alternatives would be right here in between at the Gateway Plaza, what we call Gateway Plaza, in between the Transportation Center, Uptown Station, and the museum area. So the schedule, actually we're beating the schedule so far, so this schedule says preliminary alternatives analysis to be complete in May. It's April now, or that's the process, the preferred alternative to be complete in September. So at the schedule we're on now, after this meeting, we'll have a 30-day public comment period. So still accepting comments from folks through our website. So at the end of May, we'll stop that period. And then sometime probably in June, we'll compile those comments and present them to council so they can make a decision on what the preferred alternative will be. So again, if we make that decision and council makes that decision in June, we'll be ahead of schedule. Turning it over to Stephanie.
So in terms of what we're here for today, it's to talk about the alternatives analysis process. And so this process is being done in sort of a tiered way. So the first level is where we're sort of looking at all the alternatives that, as Wayne mentioned, the council approved for us to look at in this process. And we first go through a fatal flaw analysis where we're looking for any sort of big issues that will prevent that alternative from moving forward. The second level is where we go through each of the screening criteria that we've established for this project, and we grade each of the alternatives based upon that particular criteria. So the project build alternatives that you can see up here, we'll go into a little more detail in just a minute, but there's basically 4 different types. The first being an at-grade crossing, which Carrie will talk more about, and an overpass options, as well as underpass options. So the screening criteria that we established for this project were really based off the project goals, which the first and foremost is, of course, to improve safety. The second one is to also improve access for getting from one side of Uptown North to the Uptown South area. And then thirdly is also to support economic development as well. When we went through the scoring process, we actually have 5 different metrics that we can assign. The first being a very good through all the way down to a very poor. And then for cost metrics, we went with a $sign just to sort of denote which ones were more affordable and which ones were more expensive. And as you can see, we have screening criteria that everything from between safety metrics, improving safety, through environmental ideas, things like wayfinding, where we're looking at how easy it will be for people to perceive the path from one side of the tracks to the other. All the way down through the end, which is the construction cost and the maintenance and operation cost.
So the first alternative we looked at was an at-grade crossing. And what that means is basically having a sidewalk to walk across the tracks from Uptown North to Uptown South. And looking at the level 1 screening that Stephanie just spoke about, this one was determined to be fatally flawed. The reason behind that is there's design criteria and design standards from the railroad who actually own the property that prevent us from doing this option. They don't allow it. The next one we looked at is an enclosed overpass just for passengers. This was if some of you are familiar with it, the prior design that was looked at and completed in 2014. This option would be just for passengers and only open during station hours, so you would have to go through Uptown Station to access it. The next 2 we looked at are 2 different overpass options which stem from the Uptown 2.0 master plan. The first one is an enclosed overpass, somewhat similar to the one we just looked at, except it's also open to pedestrians and cyclists, so it's open to the public. It's a little bit wider, has greater capacity to move a larger number of people through it. We also looked at an open air overpass and one that would have more amenities for the public, so some sort of plaza or overlook on the bridge to look out over the tracks. It also has, again, access to passengers, to pedestrians and cyclists, and provides that access from Uptown North to Uptown South. The last category we looked at is a few different iterations of how to do an underpass. The first one, open to the public, fairly minimalist, narrow, accomplishes the job of getting you from one side to the other, but not a lot of added amenities to it. We then looked at a wider option, a little bit more inviting, again allows all three of our user groups to get from one side to the other, and like I said, a little bit wider, open feeling to it. The last iteration we looked at for the underpass has additional public amenities, a plaza or park area to it, again a wider structure, more open feeling to it, to get from one side to the other.
So then in terms of the results, this is a lot of information I recognize on one slide, and many of you probably saw there was a board outside also that had that information on it as well. So on the left-hand side are all these screening criteria, and then along the top, each row represents a different alternative. You'll notice in the first alternative is actually the no-build alternative, and the reason that we actually scored that one is that one's actually required by the federal government to move forward in all projects, so it always is an option on the table for every project, and you actually bring that in all the way through the entire environmental process. The latter ones are alternatives 2 through alternative 4C, and as Carrie mentioned, the at-grade crossing or the sidewalk that goes across the tracks was not scored because it was fatally flawed in the first round of this process. So you're only seeing scores for the other alternatives. And ultimately, we ended up recommending alternative 4C. This one provides, as you can see, many very good amenities. It helps with safety. It has very little issues with connectivity. It helps people move between the different sides of the tracks. It also helps support economic development. In terms of the cost, obviously the no-build alternative is going to be the cheapest, so that was given the best score in terms of cost. And they go up through to the alternative 4C being the most expensive of the alternatives looked at. But ultimately, we ended up recommending the last alternative.
So how to provide feedback this evening. So many of you have already submitted a written comment card in the room across the hallway. We'll still be around for a while this evening. If you wish to submit a written comment, you can over there and then deposit it in that box in the other room. There are also in that other room copies of the written alternatives analysis report that has a little bit more narrative type of information in it, as well as some of this information here. And the Uptown 2.0 master plan, there's some copies of that over there. So again, if you'd like to submit a written comment yet this evening in the other room, please feel welcome to do that. Also, after this meeting for 30 days, we'll have opportunity for comment on our website. So visit normal.org and it will be displayed prominently on the front page, how to comment via our website. And as well, on that website, we're going to put links to these two reports, the Alternatives Analysis Report, as well as the Uptown 2.0 report as well. So that'll be easily accessed from the website if you'd like to see those. So for this evening, the other opportunity is to make public comment in this room. So we'll have a couple of mics that will be, one mic, Dan will have a mic that's floating around, so just please raise your hand if you would like to speak this evening and make a comment or ask a question. We'd ask you to state your name. And some questions, if they're technical questions, we'll do our best to answer them. Some questions, it can be a question that we may answer later in our written response, and the council will certainly see that as well. So really, ultimately, all these comments we're going to compile in a written document, and then with answers if they're questions and comments, and then the council will see those, and that'll inform their decision ultimately, we think sometime in June. So we can start, again, comments or questions, and we'll attempt to answer them if they're technical questions. And please limit if you have comments, please limit those to 3 minutes if you would, please. Thanks. Anybody here to make a comment?
I fell down a human. Yes.
My name is Alan Swanson, live in Normal. Just one question regarding this fatally flawed situation on Alternative 1. That's a pretty dramatic way to call it. I don't quite understand what the situation is with the railroad. All of a sudden, we get to this point in time, and now the railroad, or what are they making some type of dictate now that did not exist in the past? What has occurred here? We've had a open way, walking across tracks for quite a long time, and now all of a sudden the railroad is prompting Normal to kowtow to them regarding this situation? Help me to understand that. I am totally in dark on that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So at one time, as many of you are aware, there was a trail crossing in the location we're talking about here, and it was removed in 2011. And since that time, both Union Pacific Railroad, which is the owner of the right-of-way, the tracks out there, as well as Amtrak, the operating railroad, have issued design standards which prevent us from moving forward with that option. So Union Pacific has a platform design standard which does not allow for sidewalks to connect between the platforms, and that's because we're at the station here, we're at the end of the platforms, and that's how it falls into that standard. So you're actually going to see out there in the very near future, in the next few weeks maybe even, a fence being constructed between the two tracks so that people are not crossing the tracks except at roadway grade crossings where there's sidewalk elements for pedestrians. Similarly, Amtrak has station design guidelines and standards which also prevent putting in a grade crossing at a station.
My name is Julie Heil. I live in Normal, and I can actually speak a little bit to your concern. For a little bit more than 25 years, I have been a safety consultant, a safety culture change consultant. I work in the transportation sector. I have worked with Amtrak. I have worked with Union Pacific. I have worked with all the big guys. And I'm in fact just back last night from a meeting in Washington, D.C., in which we are studying the impact on public safety of the protection of evidence around railroad incidents. So this is my world. And here's what I will tell you. In 2015, which is the year that, the most recent year that this organization that I belong to called Operation Lifesaver has data, there were more than 2,000 casualties related to grade crossings. Operation Lifesaver is a volunteer organization. It is made up of state, federal, and local municipalities, all railroads that I know of, large and small, and federal regulators. UP and Amtrak are strong members of that organization. And so this is Operation Lifesaver data, and you can get it if you want to do a search for it. So more than 2,000 railroad casualties at grade crossing in 2015. Upwards of 900 of those were fatalities. So this is very unforgiving business. And the thing I say to my customers when they seem to be sort of caught in the grip of a decision between making an investment in doing the right thing on safety and saving some dollars is this would be, I can tell you, this would be a very easy decision to make, regardless of price, practically the day after a catastrophic injury. Bloomington Normal, the Uptown Normal safety dynamic is one that has bothered me for a number of years. I love Uptown. I'm a huge fan of Uptown, but I'm very nervous about the proximity of the Children's Museum, the bike path, and the railroad crossing. I mean, if you just think about that for a minute, that's not a great juxtaposition. And so I am greatly relieved to hear that the analysis you all have done has led you to do what I would say is absolutely the right thing from a safety standpoint. The last thing we want in this community is a catastrophic injury at this grade crossing. And the other last thing I would tell you is that my friends on the railroad are a very aggressive and contentious bunch. And one of the absolute points of consensus across all carriers and regulators that I know of is that an overpass is the way to go. You want to eliminate that crossing. You want to get it up and away from the wild imaginations of pedestrians who will come up with all kinds of crazy reasons to hurt themselves on railroad tracks. Thanks.
That down, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I have several comments. One is a follow-up to what she said, that people have all kinds of crazy ways to hurt themselves on railroad tracks. Last fall, I observed 3 ISU students at the College Avenue crossing. 2 of them stuck their hands out for one of those unit trains and they wanted their fingertips to touch each car, and that's what they did. The third one was so drunk, I thought he might fall into the train. But that's what they did for fun on the way home from one of the establishments in Uptown or a party or whatever. I was afraid to say anything to him. I talked to the police chief about it later, but there's really nothing you can do. You can't cure stupid. In relation to his point, this didn't come up all of a sudden. I just cannot get over the fact that when this station was being planned, and Amtrak, obviously, UP has all these station platform heights, rules, widths, right? But no one discussed the rule of UP and Amtrak about no grade crossings between platforms or no grade crossings in whatever, many decades in Illinois or anywhere else at a new station, commuter or Amtrak station. But how that Amtrak didn't mention that, the town didn't ask, I guess the Illinois Commerce Commission might have been involved. Everybody says they're a non-player. I had even contacted the Commerce Commission. There is no rule in the safety, railroad safety area. I have an email from the director of that division of the Commerce Commission saying there can't be one, but he says there hasn't been one accepted in like 30 or 40 years, like I say, numerous decades. So it didn't happen all of a sudden. It happened back at the planning stage, but how you could have all these players involved and not have brought up that there can't be an at-grade crossing for pedestrians at a station or between platforms just boggles the mind.
Hi, my name is John Croft, Normal resident, taxpayer. What occurs to me is that we can do lots of things that really appear to be wonderful and good, but it's like we've just heard both sides, both ideas. Who's to say that college students at Broadway or at Beach or wherever it is decide to cross and they just go around the gates or underneath the gates or whatever? And so whatever you do, you're not going to keep kids or others from doing things that might hurt themselves. We still can have fatalities or injuries. What we need to do is we need to be sensible, we need to be realistic, we need to do things that are responsible. And I know it's bringing up another subject, but we don't want another hole in the ground that just cost us money because it was a good idea, it wasn't well thought through. And if I were to build something and I were to voice my opinion, I would say look seriously and don't throw out the grade crossing at Linden. It's just as responsible as expecting somebody from Fell to walk down to underpass or an overpass to go across the street. I mean, they may go right underneath the barricades, and you won't stop them. So you have to consider that. The other thing is, if you look at those out there, the ones that would be the easiest to maintain, in my judgment, would be 3A, the overpass. May not be as glamorous as having a great big and more expensive underpass, but I think you could determine the cost a lot more carefully than you could the underpass. And I would ask you to all look at the taxpayers, and maybe you need to put this to a referendum. Maybe you got the authority to do it yourself, but if you do something like you did with the hole in the ground, and then you spend whatever it was, I think somewhere in the area of $1 million to finish space, which maybe you don't need. All these expenses are getting to be pretty difficult, and I think you need to be thinking about your taxpayers.
You're right back.
I'm Bill Hammett, resident of Normal, former member of the Normal Town Council and a former mayor pro tem, and I'm retired, glad to be. I question the unavailability of the at-grade crossing. My wife and I went up to the Chicago Flower Show in mid-March, and I almost jumped through the side of the train when we went through Dwight, and I saw one. Why can this little town of Dwight have a crossing that is pedestrian only, no streets, or no street at that particular point? They simply made an opening in the big fence like they're putting through here, and had put one of the pedestrian crossbars in there that completely filled that opening when it was down. I think when it was up, you still had to walk around the base of the crossbar to get through. And if it's good enough for them, why isn't it good enough for us? It's easy to say no and just back off and go home because somebody turns you down. I think Normal should get in there and fight with whatever political or whatever backup it needs to at least try to get that thing. And you've got an example right up the road that you can say, well, why, if they can do it, can't we? The next alternative to me would be the overhead bridge with the elevators and go across and back down. It's my understanding that the footings for this side are already in the ground to the east of this building. They just put a little dirt and grass over them to cover them up, but they're there. So that expense is already taken care of. I don't think we need a hole that's going to fill up with water. And back in my time on the council, stormwater was a big concern of ours. We still get 100-year rains every couple of years, and probably always will as long as we're in this climate. But that would be my comment. If Dwight can have it, why can't Normal? And if so, then why not the next step, rather than going immediately to the most expensive, which I know would carry a higher percentage, or the percentage would bring in a higher fee. Thank you.
I think Carrie may be able, Carrie.
I can touch on a few distinctions on what's different about Dwight and Normal here, the situation we're looking at. The first one is that the one in Dwight is pedestrian only, as you mentioned, and the standards I'm referring to come into play now that we're at a passenger station. They're specific to the fact that we're connecting the platforms, and that's from the railroad design standards. That's the distinction. The second thing we look at is, and one of the sources of the standard for at stations is if you have a train at both platforms and you have people trying to cross between it, a lot of times the train is longer than that area and now the crossing is blocked. And so you create a situation where people are trying to cross the tracks in an unsafe location. And if the pedestrian crossing specifically at the station area is not crossed, maybe then now we have the grade crossing at Broadway or Linden blocked. The third and the biggest distinction is it's grandfathered in. The pedestrian crossing at Dwight was not new construction, it was already there. So we're talking about taking something out at this point. there was, and it's no longer there. And so now the new standards are in effect.
Patrick Dullard from Normal. A couple of things to your comment about Dwight. The other distinction is right here at this crossing we have a main line and a siding. In Dwight it's only the main line there. They moved their passenger station about a block further south, and the pedestrian crossing you're talking about is the original one by the old station. So the trains are stopping a block further south now, or a couple blocks further south, and there's not going to be two trains. I ride Amtrak frequently. I commute from Normal up to the Chicago area. I'm in this station a lot. There's often times when there's a passenger train on what's known as the siding on this side and a freight train going through on the other side. So there's a lot of activity. Freight trains and passenger trains both are unforgiving. Like she said, you make contact with them, you're in trouble. Okay. The other thing I'd like to comment on about the overall scheme, I think that's why we elect the council to make good decisions, to make decisions that are only just not about the here and now and the taxpayer, but about the future. If we're developing a library to the south, if we're going to have an uptown has some continuity to it, I certainly believe that one of these options, crossing, is better than going to either side, either to Linden or Broadway. Linden, I can tell you, with the sharp curve on the trail, is pretty dangerous in its own right, just from slipping and falling and crossing the tracks like that. So there are some safety issues with the way those crossings are now. I think we also should look at local match. I mean, this is a pretty strong economic area. We pay a lot of federal tax dollars. Most of this project would come from that. We should keep those dollars back home. And when we start talking about local matches, they've thrown out an $8 million figure for the overpass and a $12 million figure for the underpass, and who knows where those numbers will go. But in the end of the day, then, if you're talking about a $4 million difference on a local match, we're talking about $800,000 when we have a pretty good sized budget. And so in the long term, thinking long term about our community, and if there's a library there, it seems that a forward-thinking, easily traveled way to get from one side to the other is probably our best long-term option. And so I'd ask the council to think about not just now, not just the taxpayers now, but the taxpayers in the future and the community in the future. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Stephanie Michaelis. I'm the current president of Bike Blono, and a lot of our board members and members at large are here. Wanted to speak in favor specifically of option 4C from an aesthetic viewpoint and from a mobility viewpoint, both for pedestrians and for cyclists. That seems to be the best option at this point. Aesthetically, we're a community that's capable of great things if we strive towards looking at those aesthetics, looking at those mobility issues, and avoiding that word no that is so easy to use. We need to think to the future, as Patrick said, and think to safety, as Julie said, for us to be able to move forward with something like this and think towards the future and to think about those things for our community that draw people, that make this the place that we want to be, that we already want to be, and continuing that. And then just really quickly, could you guys speak to what happens to rainwater in the underpass? I know you have a plan for that, so I don't want people to be worried about that. So,
Carrie?
Sure. So at this stage, we're very early in the process looking at concepts, and that's one of the elements that will be designed in much greater detail as we go through engineering. But with an underpass, there's a lot of details that come into play in terms of drainage piping. There's an underground water storage tank for drainage out under the circle today that does a lot of the watershed in the area now, so that's something that'll be factored into the design as well. And then in terms of sealing the structure, that's also part of the treatment, having water barriers so you're not getting leaks into the structure as well.
I'm Barbara Stewart. I live in Normal, but I was a member of the McLean County Board for a while. My preference, of course, would be the largest underpass as having the most advantages for the most people. However, I too was concerned about flooding, but then I remembered the underpass south of ISU, which used to be a horrible problem with flooding, and I don't think there's been a problem with it for years. So I feel confident that this can be solved as well. What I was wondering about, and I haven't heard anything said about it, would be the safety problems you might have in case there's some kind of technical problem with the elevators. Or old age and you have to replace them.
I mean, it will be a maintenance issue, and it's, as well as, any building we have, so there will be a maintenance issue of mechanical systems like elevators, yes. So there may be provisions, for folks that, need to get across. There may be some provisions we need to make if something like that happens to get those folks. There could be, for Amtrak passengers right now, there could be a transport of some type that takes those folks across. So we're actually talking to Amtrak about that right now, and so making sure those people can get across when they need to, yes.
Hi, my name is Bob Broad. I live here in Normal, and I'm a taxpayer. And I strongly support option 4C. I wrote a comment to that effect across the hall before I knew that was actually the officially recommended option that came out of your careful decision-making process. So I just want to say a few things about how decisions get made here in Normal. Again, looking to the future, as the way some of the others have reminded us we need to be looking when we're making these decisions. When you look at option 4C, and others have already pointed this out, it's the most appealing. It involves building a park on the south side of the tracks. That's a good fit with the vision of Uptown South. In my view, it's advantageous to have an option that allows people to pass under the railroad tracks without using elevators, because people power is the most reliable power source for moving people. People in wheelchairs, people on bikes, people with strollers, people who are walking, get them under the tracks through an underpass that looks beautiful and is inviting and part of the aesthetic of Uptown Normal. Someone mentioned possibly putting the question to a referendum, and I see it slightly differently. In my view, the larger question of the vision of the town of Normal was just put to a referendum. Chris Coos won that election as mayor, and the council members who were elected are all forward-thinking council members who pay attention to analyses and who understand the value of investment, and don't only understand the value of not spending money. It's been estimated that the investments the town of Normal has made have returned something at the level of a 250% return. We've had people saying no to the Constitution Trail. We've had people saying no to the Normal Theater. We had people saying no to the town, the hotel and convention center. We have people saying no to this building we're sitting in and standing in right now. People say no all the time. It's worth reminding ourselves that in virtually every case, the naysayers were wrong, and that the value to the town and to the community of these investments has been enormous. So let's keep doing it. Let's build option 4C.
Any other comments? Okay.
I'm Peggy Stark. I live in Normal. I'm a taxpayer. Could you put 4C picture up there and the other ones of the overpass and explain which is, so we can see which one and the costs are? Like me, I'm a runner, jogger, bicyclist, and I use the trail a lot. And for me, when they were talking about the underpass, I was concerned about safety as lighting, because we have had people that have been attacked on the trail, and that's, to me, that would be the place where somebody would just loiter underneath there at certain hours when there's not a lot of people using the trail or in that area. So that I would be more in favor of something over the top, but when I saw some of the pictures out there, the ways to get up, as far as the ramps and stairs, you have a bicycle, you can't go upstairs with a bicycle, so ramps, but one side looks good, the other side it's so steep. So I would like some, it'd be nice if there would have been some way in that one, an easier way to get back down. Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, again, please feel free. We've got until 7 o'clock tonight. If you'd like to go in the other room and make a written comment, please do so. And then again, we'll have comments. We can make a comment on our website, normal.org, and those documents will also be available on the website. So please, again, feel free to make either a comment tonight or get on our website and make a comment. Yep. Thank you.